At first, I thought my water pressure was low because of old pipes. But every time my neighbor's water pump started, mine would drop. That's when I realized he wasn't just a grumpy old man. He was stealing from me. And what started as a small leak of water turned into a flood of karma. All I had to do was flick a valve, and everything he built came crashing down. I had just bought a house in the capital city, a rare find, honestly. The price was far below market value, mostly because the previous owners, family, friends of mine, needed the money fast and hadn't lived in the country for years. They were mid-renovation when they left, and for the last 3 years, the place just sat there partially gutted, unattended, and wide open to anyone who felt like wandering in. It was a fixer-upper for sure. No proper door lock, just a flimsy padlock hanging off the main door like a sad little accessory. No front gate, either. Anyone from the street could just stroll right in like they owned the place. I knew I'd have work ahead of me, but for the price and the location, I was willing to roll up my sleeves. What I didn't expect was that my first day in the house wouldn't involve unpacking boxes, but removing someone else's motorbike from my garage. Yep, there it was, right there in my garage like it belonged. No note, no explanation, just parked like this was still an abandoned lot. I didn't even waste energy wondering whose it was. I just wheeled it back out onto the street, installed a brand new front gate that same afternoon, and locked up properly. A few hours later, some older man came banging on my gate furious, like I'd towed his car. I didn't answer, just watched quietly from my window as he huffed and paced, then gave up and took the bike back. That was my first proper introduction to the neighborhood. And let's just say, it didn't get better. The area had clearly gotten used to this property being empty. People blocked my gate constantly, thinking no one lived there. Delivery drivers parked in my driveway like it was public property. But a clear, no parking sign eventually solved that. Still, something always felt off. Not dangerous, but not exactly warm either. I was the new guy on the block, but also someone who disrupted the weird comfort people had with this house being abandoned. The change wasn't welcome, especially not by the old man next door. Now he was something else, probably in his 70s, living on the bottom floor of a 3-story house. The 2 upper floors he rented out to tenants, and from what I could tell, they mostly kept to themselves. But him? He was the type to glare over the fence every time I let my dogs out, the type to pretend he wasn't staring when I pulled up in my car. He never said anything directly to me, but I knew from the previous owners that he wasn't happy about the house being sold. Apparently, he'd voiced more than a few complaints before they left. I wasn't worried about him, though. I'm 6 feet tall, have 3 large dogs, and I wasn't the type to be intimidated. If he wanted to be grumpy about the sale, that was his problem. I had bigger things to focus on, like repairing busted pipes, fixing loose wiring, repainting peeling walls, and trying to bring the house back to life after 3 years of abandonment. But about a week in, I started to notice something weird. It started small. I was in the shower and the water pressure dropped just a little, but enough to notice. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe the main supply was inconsistent. Maybe the plumbing inside needed tweaking. I had a laundry list of home repair issues anyway. But the next day, same thing. And this time, I heard something outside. A loud thunk followed by the unmistakable hum of a water pump. It was coming from next door. That's when it clicked. Every time the water pressure dropped in my house, his water pump was on. Coincidence? Maybe. But once that idea got into my head, I couldn't let it go. So, I tested it. Every time I heard his pump, I'd try turning on taps. Water pressure? Weak. 10 minutes after his pump went silent, I'd try again perfect pressure. This wasn't some weird fluke. That's when suspicion turned into certainty. Once I was sure it wasn't a coincidence, I couldn't unsee it. Every time the neighbor's pump kicked on, my own water pressure dropped just enough to be annoying and just enough to raise red flags. It was like clockwork. Pump hums, pressure drops. Pump stops, pressure returns. The logical part of my brain still tried to argue. Maybe our homes shared the same line, and the water department had messed something up. Maybe it was the city's issue, not the neighbor. But the realist in me, the part that had already seen a stranger's bike parked in my garage, knew better. I wasn't just imagining it. This guy was stealing my water. It all started to make sense. The house had been empty for years, and according to the family friends I bought it from, the water bills had always been suspiciously high heaven when no one was living there. They blamed it on leaks from unfinished plumbing and brushed it off. But now I knew better. The old man next door had probably gotten used to having free water during those empty years. Maybe he thought no one would notice. Maybe he just didn't care. And when I moved in, he figured I'd never catch on. Well, I did. I started doing my own mini investigation. I'd turn off every tap in the house and wait. When his pump came on, I'd listen. I'd check my pressure. I even marked down times and duration s. I got that petty. And every time I tested it, it just reinforced what I already knew. I still couldn't find exactly where the siphoning was happening. There were pipes that ran alongside the property line, and the house had been under construction with exposed lines and no gate for years. He could have made a connection anywhere. It wouldn't have taken much, just one sneaky pipe running off mine into his system. But honestly, I didn't need to find the pipe. I had enough confirmation, enough cause. Still, I didn't act right away. I thought about confronting him, about knocking on his door and demanding answers, but I knew exactly how that would go. Denial, excuses, maybe even feigned offense. And even if I did prove it, then what? Small claims court? Legal headaches? No, that wasn't my style. I wanted something better, something cleaner. So I waited. I thought about it for a few days, watching, listening, timing the pump like a guy planning a heist. But this wasn't about money. Water in my country is dirt cheap. My entire bill, even with 3 dogs, regular car washes, and watering my garden, rarely crossed $5 a month. It wasn't about the cost. It was about the principle. He was stealing, period. Entitled enough to think he could help himself to something that wasn't his, just because the house looked empty. And now that I was living here, he was still doing it like nothing had changed. That smug, passive-aggressive look he gave me every time we passed each other suddenly made a lot more sense. He probably thought I was just some clueless guy who'd never realize what he was up to. That he'd just keep siphoning off my supply like always, no questions asked. But if there's one thing I can't stand, it's people who take advantage of others and act like they're above consequences. So I made my decision. I wasn't going to confront him. I was going to teach him a lesson, quietly, effectively, and permanently. The plan I came up with was simple. I didn't need to break any laws, confront anyone, or risk getting dragged into some shouting match with a stubborn old man. All I had to do was turn off my water. Not permanently, of course, just strategically, just when he needed it the most. See, here's how the water system works where I live. We rely on pumps to get water up to rooftop storage tanks. These tanks have a ball valve that detects when the water level is low. When it is, it sends a signal to turn on the pump, and when it's full, it shuts the pump off. Simple. But if there's no water coming in to raise that level, if, say, someone has cut the supply from the source, the pump just keeps running, and running, and running, constantly drawing power, heating up, overworking itself, and eventually, burning out. And that's what I wanted. Not just to stop him from stealing my water, but to let him feel the consequences of what he'd been doing. I wasn't going to scream about it. I wasn't even going to warn him. I was just going to let him reap what he'd quietly sown. So, one quiet Monday afternoon, I waited, watched through my window. As soon as I heard the familiar click of his pump starting up, I walked outside and went straight to my water mains. Click. Off. Then, I went back inside, grabbed a cold drink, and went about my day. Now, I didn't expect fireworks. I figured it might burn the pump out over time, and maybe a tenant would complain. Maybe he'd grumble to someone about how the city water is unreliable, and then discover the problem was actually a busted motor. But what happened next? Well, I didn't exactly plan for this. It was sometime after midnight, maybe around 3 a.m., when I started hearing voices outside. Not angry shouting, not yet, just hushed, agitated tones. My bedroom faces the street, so I could hear bits of conversation drifting over the wall. Why is there no water upstairs? Do you have power? The lights won't come on. That got my attention. I slipped out of bed, peeked through the curtains. The entire house next door was lit with phone flashlights. The tenants, clearly woken out of their sleep, were moving around confused, frustrated, irritated. That's when the shouting began. One of the tenants' middle-aged guy, lived on the second floor, was yelling at the old man, loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "No water? No electricity? You said this place was fine!" Apparently, not only had the pump fried itself, but the wiring couldn't handle the constant load. In our country, modern wiring is key, but this guy was still rocking 90s-level infrastructure. That pump pulled so much power trying to function without water that it blew the fuse system and possibly more. Power gone, water gone, entire rental house non-functional. The next morning, I didn't even have to snoop. Word traveled fast. One of the tenants was already moving out. The other was on the phone with the police, lodging a formal complaint. Here, cutting off essential services, whether by accident or negligence, a serious offense. No court process required. The police can directly find the responsible party. And guess who they find? Old man next door, 500. In this economy, that's not a small number. Add to that the fact that he had to refund both tenants' deposits money he likely didn't have and couldn't legally rent again until the wiring and water systems were fully repaired. Within a week, both tenants were gone. So was his income. He was packing up his own belongings and getting ready to move out to his daughter's house. And all of this caused by one little flick of my water valve. No yelling, no fights, no lawsuits, just quiet, clean consequences. But wait, it gets even better. 2 days after the meltdown, the old man came knocking. It was sometime in the late afternoon. I was sitting on my porch with one of my dogs at my feet, sipping some iced tea and enjoying the relative peace and quiet now that his house wasn't crawling with tenants and their endless noise. I saw him walking slowly toward my gate, hands behind his back, shoulders hunched a little more than usual. He stopped a few feet away, not ringing the bell or calling out, just stood there for a second, eyeing me. I didn't say anything, just looked back at him, calm and unbothered. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Did you, happen to turn off your water a few nights ago?" There it was. No preamble, no hello, no apology for parking his bike in my garage weeks ago, no explanation for the mystery siphoning or the broken infrastructure in his house, just that one loaded question. I took a slow sip, letting the silence stretch for a moment. "Oh yeah," I said. "There was a leak in one of my pipes. Big one. I turned the supply off until I could get the plumber in to fix it. Didn't want to flood anything." His expression didn't change much. He didn't react, didn't argue, didn't press, but his Aisha's eyes gave him away. They narrowed just slightly, like someone trying to figure out how much you know and how much you're not saying. He nodded once, stiffly. "All right then, just wondering." Then he turned and walked away. That was it. No denial, no confession. Not even a must have been a coincidence. Just a quiet little acknowledgement that something had happened and that he probably knew I knew, but he couldn't prove it and he couldn't do a damn thing about it. I watched him shuffle back to his house, now noticeably emptier. No lights on in the upper floors, no music, no signs of life. Just one bitter man standing in the wreckage of his own entitlement. And you know what? I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. He could have come clean. He could have apologized, offered to pay, tried to make it right, but instead, he just kept taking, assuming no one would notice or care. He thought he was being clever. Thought he could cheat the system, siphon off a little water, and get away with it because the house had been empty before I moved in. And maybe he could have, if he hadn't gotten greedy, if he hadn't been so obvious about it. But he pushed his luck, and I'm not the kind of guy to just let that slide. The aftermath? Oh, it was glorious. I heard from one of the other neighbors that the fines had set him back badly. Apparently, he'd been relying on the rental income for his daily needs. Without tenants, without working plumbing or wiring, he couldn't make ends meet. So he packed up and moved in with his daughter across town. She wasn't thrilled about it either, from what I heard. They hadn't spoken much before this, and now he was depending on her for housing. Meanwhile, I brought in a licensed plumber and had every inch of my water system checked. Sure enough, he found two suspiciously routed pipes running near the boundary wall. One of them had a crude fitting on it, capped off with tape and rusted metal just about the right age to match when the house went vacant. We had those pipes removed, capped everything off clean, sealed the access points. My water pressure has been perfect ever since. And the best part? Peace. Pure, uninterrupted, glorious peace. No more shady pump noises, no more strangers parking in my garage, no more leeches trying to take advantage of a quiet new homeowner. Just me, my house, my dogs, and a firm reminder that sometimes the most satisfying revenge doesn't require shouting or fighting. Sometimes, all it takes is knowing when to shut something off and letting karma do the rest.